I'm going to go ahead.
Hey, Frank.
All righty, Tom. Frank Watson here with Tom Probasco, who has something to say. And we're discussing today uh, what we're doing and how it might need to change. Tom asked the question, uh, have we reached some sort of natural end? And I don't know that this has a natural end. It um, has a resilience about it that I think would would be killing something that's live and vital and desirable. To put it to an end at this point would be untimely at best. So
And it runs on you're more techie than me. It runs on a YouTube channel, then it also shows up on your just your I'll call it your regular Facebook page is what
I
I think you told
yeah
me.
I posted to my my Facebook page and to Acoustic Indiana,
Acoustic Indiana.
um, both of those as well as on YouTube. And I do that. It's available if anybody wants to look for it. I don't worry about advertising. I've received a letter or an email saying, "Well, you could be doing this and this and this and this,"
Oh,
and uh, I'm quite satisfied to do what we do, and I think it has a wonderful purpose in documenting what we do.
yeah, that's what
And
I thought about it as well. Well, we talked about that.
yeah, so the timing is not just I'm reaching a point of uh, I'm closer to being in Indian time, for one thing, and
Mhm.
Indian time is we'll see you one of these days, or we'll be there sometime in the spring,
Yeah.
and uh, to some extent that may be part of my DNA. To some extent, to some
Yeah.
extent, is I'm 81 years old, and I my life has a kind of a flow to it.
Yeah.
Uh, I get focused on things, and I don't worry about if I got something to do. I have a stepdaughter to remind me,
Yeah.
and I have friends who remind me, and and I call on them because uh, I'm in one of the more creative parts of my life. There for a long time, I had to go out and do things for other people that really didn't lend themselves to my having time to start in on a subject or a project
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
just go as long as I felt like it. I did that
Well,
with songwriting for a while and I
yeah.
stopped
Yeah.
because I'm not a mechanical songwriter. I don't do formulas so much. And uh, I had to work.
Oh yeah. It reminds me of their song, The Nashville Hooker. Because that was the industry you were talking about.
Yeah.
Someday we ought to read. I'll read that one. But yeah, the Nashville Hooker.
I've,
Yeah.
speaking of which, I've been modifying a song that really works well for waking Barbara up.
Oh, yeah.
And
Which that's why I kind of like this time frame because by 11 we should be about done with this because you
yeah.
typically yeah. But anyway, what song are you modifying?
Oh, da 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 da. You know that we love you,
Do do. Yes, we
and
do.
I'm not even sure what song it is, but
Yeah. Yeah. It could be
I
a number of
do
songs.
I love you, Barbara. Oh yes, I do.
Yeah.
I love you, Barbara. Oh yes, I do. I love you, Barbara. It's true. Oh, Barbara, I love you. And
Cool.
then I love her in the morning. I love her at noontime, and and she'll lay there in bed and just start smiling so big.
Yeah.
And uh, for too many years, I it took me a while to get away from my military upbringing.
Hmm.
Uh, my father learned most of what he knew figuring out on his own under very little supervision until he got to the Army. And then the Army instilled a very regimented kind of a thing on top of a natural woodsman.
Hmm.
And then he got cured, and uh, that was kind of sealed into him in World War II and the Philippines and Korea. And he brought all that home, and I had the benefit of it my whole childhood. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like a cross between basic training and a concentration camp.
Yeah. I'm going to say, I know that there were aspects that took, I'll just say, recovery.
Oh, well, yeah.
And others, habits that you don't regret. But hearing you talk about it being a woodsman, uh, it makes me think of some things I've been thinking about recently. Being understanding, at some point, you know, we all became consumers, and that arose with all the industry, the anything you care to name, agricultural industry, music industry, publishing industry. But what I got to what and this morning there was a piece on the morning edition NPR that were talking about AI. Um, and there arose in my mind again this idea that we consume. And years ago, before AI was ever the average person ever heard anything about it, I was already thinking about how we are consumers of things we don't know anything about really, except how to use them. Um, you think about back 100 years or more when this country was largely agricultural. 90% of the people that were farmers. My family were tenant farmers on both sides. So the simple tools they used, they knew how to use them. They understood them. They could make them in some cases. Even if we were talking about steel, there were people who understood that if they weren't steel workers, they understood that process. My grandfather did. He never worked in a steel mill, but he knew how steel was made. And I got to thinking, and I wrote this thing that I'll read since you mentioned him being a good woodsman. it made me think of this, and it was see if I can pull out the right book here. I've kind of, as I tend to do, I kind of stumble and fumble around. See if I can find the one that has it. Oh, yeah. Um, then I'll probably shift to something else, but wherever this conversation leads us, where we'll go. So it began to really bother me in a fundamental way to be using things to just be a consumer. Maybe your expertise, maybe you know something about one knows something about, kind of a narrow, if your job requires you to know something about uh, whatever it is, medicine, communications, whatever it is, but otherwise you are a consumer. So this occurred to me at some point. There and Back Again is the name of it. It used to be said often that if God wanted man to fly, he'd have given him wings. Instead, you could say, we gave them to ourselves. But what a loose use of the word we. Almost all have simply waited for the day and the time to arrive, to line up and get on board, felt the brief bursts of flame and thunder, the rising much like an elevator, and the dropping down the same. The floor tilts, levels out. The sun glares through the small porthole windows and bump. Welcome to wherever. Almost all of us could fold a copy of our itinerary into a little plane and sail it up the aisle, but not one could make a sheet of paper. Now, this is already back, itinerary, you're holding a piece of paper. Now it's going to be on your phone or some electronic gadget. But you get the idea, even then, uh, we're just consumers. And that really has continued. I remember when that set in, and I wrote that having flown somewhere for work. And I thought, I'm just a consumer. And the more that kind of thing happens, the more divorced we are from the stage that supports all of us. We live in the built environment. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so hard for a lot of people to understand the fundamental, um, unless you're working outside, because there are people doing that. Migrant workers, especially, working on farms, they know, they feel it. Uh, but if you live in the built environment, you're hidden. You can turn away. You can ignore. If you're in air conditioning and heating. But that's just a thing that when you mention about the woodsman, I've had family members who were uh, lived off the land that my great grandfather, he was in the Civil War, great great grandfather was in the Civil War, and it was land he bought, and then he and his wife, who may or may not have been an Indian, lived in that land. I mean, they lived, as my grandfather said, they set up housekeeping in the side of a hill. They didn't consider themselves poor. It's a whole different world. This would have
Yes.
been after, the end of in the mid 1800s. But anyway, but that's what that uh, thing you said about him being a woodsman. But he was also coming into the world having been in the military, having been in a
Hmm.
major conflict. So that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, and as a family, we lived in a world that was becoming a consumer society that,
Yeah.
such as you've described, and he was not ready for a consumer society.
Yeah.
And um, um, he liked to build things and wanted me to 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 follow that path. Uh, but he really he struggled with life outside of the military, but he was sickened by what he had to do.
Yeah.
And I think I'm still exploring all that, including the well, you know that I'm a follower of Jesus,
Mhm.
and uh, as a Christian, I have to seek peace. As a citizen, and perhaps as a human being, I have to uh, be aware of the violence that human beings pretty naturally see. It seems all creatures engage in some sort of violence.
Mhm.
If you go on and watch the videos on Facebook or YouTube, they've oh my goodness, such violence, and some of it is human against human, and some of it is various animals in the process of predation and
Mhm.
the violent ways they kill and eat.
Yeah.
And so um, that and living lives that are real lives and not just consuming.
Yeah.
And some of that depends on what we do with what we're born with. And an interesting thing is, as you talked about the aircraft, if we were meant to fly, we would have had wings.
You
Well,
remember that? You remember that being said years ago. God
yeah,
man fly.
but
We give them
the
wings.
thing is, uh, we were given imaginations to imagine ourselves with wings.
True. And 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 that was done, but it was done by a very small segment of the population. That's why I said it was a very so you could say we gave them to ourselves, but
Yeah,
who's we? Most of us just got on board.
the interesting thing to me, as we talk here, is uh, the historical reenactments uh, of different time periods and how people lived and how they made things and how they made lives. Yeah, it's really worth going to historical reenactments and seeing the combination of technologies and trades and lifestyles, agriculture, farming, gardening. I think gardening is such an incredible thing. I I I had a taste of it growing up, and I I want to do more. I did some little teeny tiny bit at Sycamore when we were there, but I want to learn how to put things in the ground, how to save seeds.
Well, and Barbara did it on Steel Street,
She
the
was an
yard.
incredible gardener because she started wherever she was and she did as she damn pleased.
Yeah, but she knew what she was doing. I mean, it was not, some gardens you go, you look at them and there's the tomatoes, there's the beans, and you go into the yard and you couldn't just take it all in one viewing. It was a, it was a work of agriculture, it was a work, but it was a work of art.
Some of that I got to help with.
Yeah,
She worked with what came out of the ground as well as what she brought to it and put in it.
yeah,
If something was growing, she would look at it and she would make a decision. Well, I think I like this. I'm going to let it grow. Or you know, I
yeah,
that does not fit here. I'm going to remove it.
right,
And uh, a lot of the work that I did in the garden was simply supporting her efforts.
right.
I kept the edges neat so that the city would know that it was a garden.
Yeah, right. I remember you saying that.
Yeah,
Yeah, you had to, city codes and whatnot.
yeah. And so I would mow a patch around the next to the street and keep it real neat. Uh, and then there was when she would let some things grow, and then when they had their life, these big dried stalks of weeds or plants or that she'd pull them out of the ground and stack them up, and then I'd come along with a pitchfork and get a big forkful and carry it and put it on a compost pile where that
Yeah,
stuff would break
composting.
down over time.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and then I built stone walkways and
Yeah. I remember seeing those and
did a lot of the composting. I fell in love with trench composting rather than let something rot in a composter because we didn't have enough composters to accommodate uh, the amount of uh, waste that coming out without it really getting kind of stinky. You just dig a trench, double dig the trench, and then you bring out your compost, your waste from your food, um, and put it in the bottom, the lower part, and then cover it uh, up to the level of the garden. And when you do that, the scent, and you don't put meat in it. You stay away
for
from
the
that.
most part. Yeah.
Yeah. So you didn't have that much. I never had any trouble with varmints digging into it.
We don't either.
So
No. I've composted for decades now. And
and I regret the loss of that garden because I had brought in topsoil, I had composted,
yeah.
and Barbara had planted some things that were just, there was a
Yeah.
little grove of
Oh, I
Russian
remember
olive,
it.
that
Yeah.
had a place to sit and quietly and be inconspicuous and really enjoy the neighborhood without calling attention to yourself.
Right.
And in that neighborhood, you had to be kind of careful about calling attention to yourself. I I I remember walking, pulling up in our driveway, which was in back of the house, and stepping out and hearing pop 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 pop, uh, hmm, and walking up towards Brookside Avenue, and there was an officer down there in a gunfight with a couple of people,
Yeah.
and uh, hmm. So I didn't want to join in the fun because uh, he seemed to be holding his own. What I did was I called 911, and they said, "Thank you. We did receive a call about this already.
Oh,
Would you like to give your name? Nope. Uh, it's like the survival things that you do in a neighborhood like that.
yeah,
You don't want to you don't want to make yourself into a target. And I had basically 50 years on the Near East Side of Indianapolis, coming there from a rural background. And now that I've left it, you know, I'm glad I did it. Uh, it was an education for me. It was an experience. And at least one person I know thought I was helpful. Uh, when I ran the mini bike program, teaching kids to ride mini bikes is a
yeah,
alternative to uh,
yeah,
the juvenile injustice system.
right, yeah,
And
fast,
years later, having that one come up to me on the street and say, Pops, you don't know me, but I was one of your mini bikers, and I just wanted to thank you. If it hadn't been for you, I would have been in jail a lot more time than I have been.
and yeah, and that sounds funny, but it's not.
It's not.
It's real progress. It
It,
it increases the opportunity for
yes,
success for a person.
yes. So he saw it as a real benefit. And after I kind of caught my breath, I did too. I thought, well, that is really great.
Yeah,
I there were from my time as a house parent uh,
yeah,
on the little bit farther out there, right by Howe High School,
yeah,
and I heard from uh, a young person who had been looking for me and finally found me on Facebook. And bless her heart, she said I saved her life. And
yeah,
I need to hear things like that because
yeah.
I'm, I tend to remember a lot of times I think that my failures, you
Right.
know,
Well, I think one does.
I want to get away from that. I've apologized to everybody that I can find that needs an apology, and I'm in the process of growing up. I drank a lot of beer and made some pretty bad decisions,
Yeah,
beer and other stuff,
yeah.
and so I I made some mistakes, and I did some good things. I did some things that
Well, and
were
if
stinky.
you've got two people, and you know this, who have bothered to look up and say it, there are untold numbers, and you know this, that were helped, and you just you're not in contact. But I know, I know some um, that
I,
would say that to you. So, but I know what you mean. You tend to a certain personality. I do this. Tend to think of the negative, and I try not to as much as I, you know, would maybe be naturally inclined to do. But I know what you mean. So
yeah, I think I'm in a stage of my walk with Jesus that I'm looking at at that tendency to look at the things I would do differently today,
yeah,
and I think I have to accept forgiveness in order to complete the work that uh, if anybody uh, needs to hear any apologies, they're always welcome to contact me. Uh, but I'm I think I have to the magic in being forgiven is not complete until you completely accept the forgiveness.
mhm.
And when we accept forgiveness, we're able to go ahead and live creatively and lovingly. And that's where I'm turning that particular corner, and I'm letting myself be who I am, uh, in terms of uh, coming to grips with my own dark side. You know, Carl Jung, uh, talking about the dark, the shadow self, um, and that's part of us. And I'm one of the people that has really got my attention right now is Juliana of Norwich, who was a Catholic. Uh, was she Catholic? Yeah. She was in the 1300s in England. She lived in a cell, one room, and she communicated to the world through a window. But she had revelations, and one of the revelations was, she Jesus appeared to her, and in one of them, she was told, "And all things are well, and all things are well, and all things will be well." And when she questioned Jesus about hell, uh, he refused to give her an answer. You don't need to know that. And some of the near death experiencers, people who have died and found themselves on the other side of death, well, in positive circumstances, have returned talking about having a life review that was not uh, uh, critical. It was simply a you look at things to learn from them. And it's not that you're judged, it's not that God judges us as harshly as we judge ourselves. We are looked, there are, the way I get it, to be part of uh, uh, a higher level of existence, we can call it heaven. We have to be able to operate at certain levels of love, and we're here to learn how to do that. And this really squares with Juliana of Norwich, uh, and her reports, and other saints. I had a Lutheran minister up in Minnesota one time. I'll have to tell you about my adventures in Minnesota, up in Orr, Minnesota. Art Dale. He gave me his version of Lutheran theology. He said, for Lutherans, the good news is that we're all saved, and our job as Lutherans is to spread the good news. And the way he presented it to me is, you don't have to be a Lutheran, you don't even have to believe it. You don't really experience it until you believe it. So hearing the good news and accepting it can really take a load off, but it's all okay, which is basically what Juliana of Norwich says, and what the near-death experiencers say. It's all okay, and
Yeah.
it's going to be okay. And so I'm working my way through all that and through my life as uh, um, a person on the planet. Now today, for instance, I was looking at Irish stick fighting, shillelaghs, and how they're made, and what kind of wood is used, and it's something that it's a form of violence. It's not, uh, but what happens if you stop doing that? The very the British authorities who clamp down on violence of like stick fighting at the local level are perfectly capable of creating colonies that can create bombs that get loose in all the world, can blow up the whole daggone world. I think we were better off fighting each other with sticks,
Well,
you know?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. They were, you read these kinds of things about, um, well, I remember talking to you about somebody was describing Native American conflicts within tribes, and they'd say, yeah, they'd really go at it, but there was no notion that they were going to eradicate the other people.
that it was done the from my reading, I would say that that was done in some instances. Um, there's some evidence that it happened out in the Pueblo areas with some tribes, and there was also evidence that it happened along the Ohio. Uh, there, uh, there, Eli Lilly wrote a book about it, uh, and or it was included in his writing that some of the legends uh, included a white tribe that may have been Viking,
Mhm.
a Viking group that had been
You
totally
hear, yeah, you hear
totally
that
wiped
kind of
out.
thing, but yeah,
But that, according to my reading, and I can't, the information all kind of goes together after a while. I just kind of put together my own idea of what happened. The Kentucky area was not settled uh, because it was considered to be haunted. It was used as a hunting ground by several tribes. They would migrate down for seasonal hunting, but they didn't settle there because it was haunted, because of the tribe that had been exterminated.
mhm.
When you exterminate a tribe, and this goes along with the book on killing, that
Mhm.
that there's something in us that that is not happy with killing.
Yeah.
A lot of the Native American warfare consisted of counting coup, which was you had a
Mhm.
coup stick like a shillelagh, and tapping somebody with it during a battle and getting away with it was uh, more honor than killing and taking a scalp. Um, and that was on probably on a continuum of uh, how the scarce resources were and
A lot of factors.
a lot of factors, but uh, the the
Nature of weaponry,
yeah
you know.
but the vacuum in the Kentucky area contributed to the loss of power by those tribes, because when the white settlers moved in, there was space for them. Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. They came there and there was game of a ton of game, no permanent settlements to stop them. And so uh, here comes a tribe on their seasonal hunting tour, and oh, there's people building houses and they're taking over our hunting grounds, and we'll just see about that. Uh, so looking at all that is fascinating, and I recall reading back in the 70s predictions about uh, some of the things that are happening now, the mass migrations of um, refugees,
Mhm.
the development of private police forces, uh, uh, and like uh, uh, the armies that are contractors. They the U.S. government has used is it Blackstone?
Yeah, yeah, that was
Uh,
during the W administration, kind of.
and the Wagner Group that Putin used
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, same.
almost bit him,
Yeah,
and all that was foreseen. And I'm interested in the reading of those runes,
yeah.
but I'm interested in. I've got a stick that my grandson Stephen uh, grabbed for me as we left 1515 Steel. It was growing up. It was a shoot off of a root of Japanese crabapple out there by the little pond.
Mhm.
And crabapple is a very hard wood, and I wanted to a souvenir, a piece of what was growing there to take with me. And I'm turning it into a walking stick, very special walking stick.
Yeah,
It's been seasoned now for uh, um, over 6 years, and um, I'm 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 starting to work with it. And it's a slimmer than a regular cane, uh, and it's not as sturdy as your average shillelagh kind of a stick or a cane.
yeah,
But for its size, it serves as a walking stick. It's got enough rigidity to do that for balance, and I use it to help me judge distance. Uh, when I walk, I can use it. I'm not blind by any means, but I have a problem with my eyesight,
mhm.
uh, and so uh, eventually I may have to get my eyes operated on. But in the
Yeah,
meantime, uh, going new places, I have trouble, picking out certain things that like curbs,
yeah. Oh,
changes in the level of payment, that sort of thing. So
yeah,
I'm making that. If it gets worse, it's going to be really handy. Uh,
yep, yeah. And it's a, as you say, it'll be, it's I don't have this one prepared to read, but it reminds me of something that maybe will come back around. Um, a souvenir, you mentioned that. One thing I pulled together, things get away. Also, when you're, especially things that you remember from early times, when you're very young. Uh, and I, at some point, didn't have, well, I'll read it here in a minute. And a lot of people don't remember crystal radios, but
Oh,
this actually, I'm kind of going back to the idea of, um, technology that we can sort of understand, because it's simple versus something that most people, they'll use it, but they won't understand it. Maybe they won't even wonder about it. But you've probably been associated now. Even crystal radio sets varied in complexity and power. But I'm seeing that tree behind you there, Frank. The Christmas tree reminds me once again. So this, I and I'll read about it.
okay.
That's a picture I put on the front of this particular chapbook that you had me do, and it looks very much like the one I'll describe is described in this poem, and you can see it looked just like that, virtually the same. But it is called simply, I had a little radio. I had a little radio, a crystal radio I got for Christmas from one of my aunts, maybe 30 years ago. It was shaped like a rocket. It fit in my pocket. It had a tuner and a wire for the ground and an earphone to deliver the sound. Music for you, the program host said at night as I listened snug in my bed. That voice existed, it seemed to me then, only to introduce the cello and violin. It didn't belong to a man with a job. It was more like magic, a lot like God. I loved that little radio, is all I'm trying to say. I think of some big, expensive ones offered for sale today. Picture a stack of metallic boxes, a shiny electronic tower. Now find the switches for turning it on. They're usually labeled power. Uh, so something you said there made me think of well, kind of back to the idea of, you could look, you could sort of understand how a crystal radio worked, but you weren't going to figure it out by looking at it. But um, it didn't, you didn't plug it in. And the magical thing to me, laying there in bed listening to it, was just hooked up. I had the ground hooked up the ground wire, put the earphone in there, and you move the top of it up and down. That was the tuner, and you could pull in. I just remember that particular program. Don't know where it came out of. I lived in Xenia at the time. Could have been Dayton. Who knows what it was picking up? But it was called "Music for You." The program host said. Uh, but just kind of back to that. Um, where you've got, and so that's wherever that I lost that. That was that. I don't have that anymore. Thinking about things
Pity.
you saved to remind you. But uh, just gonna. The other thing about that tree behind you there, I guess I'm kind of working these in as we just went
Yeah.
out of the Christmas season. So next week it'll be, we're on to the New Year's. I did something, well, a guy I'm getting acquainted with, Aaron Lipp.
Yeah.
Now you told me, this was the thing I meant to say earlier, you kind of, your time it's getting more variable. Aaron encouraged me to post poems. He said, pick a day and roughly the same time of the day, uh, which it has its use. You can go that route, and maybe it has its value. I don't know, but I took his advice and did it. And one of my posts posted here Monday, kind of tend to stick with Monday between 11 and 1, just kind of following his advice. Uh, was another one related to this time of year, December. Um, and I did a thing. This one is just called a brilliance, but I don't do this very often. I've done it a few times where I take, instead of just having it's hard to see here, but it looks, when I put it together, it kind of shaped, you can see the title, a brilliance. It's shaped like a tree. That tree behind you
Yeah.
reminds me
Okay.
of that. And so I'm working that in here. And it's one of those poems that really, it describes a passing moment. I guess maybe all moments are passing moments, but it just goes like this: a brilliance. It was December, 96. A brilliance. Last night, snow made moonlight too bright, making me stay when I wanted to go in a state of wakefulness. So that was a really, brief thing. Almost I didn't expound on it. I did that. That's all there was to it. Um, but it was just one of those, I couldn't even say, I kind of remember where I was when that occurred, but it wasn't anything I could say, well, this is what caused that. It was just those elements. The thought of a tree, and that's the shape I put the thing in, but moonlight and snow. And I think I was working a night shift, an evening shift, so I got off late. I was working with somebody that I became very well acquainted with later, but was just getting to know each other. But all those elements together just put together that real brief thing that I wrote down. It'd be one of those things like William Stafford said. Somebody would say, "Well, I could write that. That was so simple. I could write that." And he just said, "Yeah, but you didn't.
Yeah.
But you can,
You can. Yeah.
yeah, if you want to." So, but anyway, but yeah, you've got. Now I'm thinking, you said your father wanted you to become, more involved in making things, and actually, my grandparents did the same kind of thing. They gave me a set of lathe tools, and I had absolutely no set, no. I couldn't use them. I didn't have a lathe,
Yeah.
but they were sending a message that this is what you should do because they came from that time uh, when people could make things. They
Yeah.
had tools they understood. Now it's interesting listening to you talk about this stick. You're working with that stick. You're altering it. You're
Yeah.
shaping it. You're sanding it.
Yeah.
Um,
And I grew it.
and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I watched it. I watched it come up, and I watched how straight it was, and I pointed it out to my grandson,
yeah.
and uh, and it's all, it's all
It's
something that's
connected.
very intimate.
Yes. Yeah, you have an intimate connection
Right.
uh to that item. Yeah,
And to the place, and to the uh, part of my spiritual development that took place there, and the spiritual development continues.
yeah.
And there's so much that I look at as part of like a river of life, that, you know, we're here in this instant, and and there's these things that we carry with us that we picked up along the way, and including memories.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that you know sometimes we have to let go of some things.
Yeah.
Like the sins that we've committed. We have to let go of our guilt and learn and integrate in order to be healthy. And it's in being healthy and modeling healthy for children and our neighbors, and in living in ways that serve our neighbors and as well as ourselves in good ways, instead of going around saying, "Oh shit, I really messed up." You know, you got to let it let it be what it is. It's part of uh, you know, it's someplace that you've left behind. Like Jesus told the woman at the well, uh, who had sinned, uh, according to the law of her people, and he told her, uh, "Go and sin no more.
Yeah.
You are forgiven. Your sins are forgiven. Go and sin no more." And uh, I, I, I think that as we do that, uh, by sinning no more, we embrace what's healthy, what's good, what's whole, and as the more of us that do that, that grow into wholeness, uh, the better for everybody.
It's interesting when you say, you experience life, and you use the word spiritual, and with a particular religious tradition. And I'm thinking about people who don't use that language, don't have no church upbringing, whatever. I'm thinking of a friend. Well, yeah, I'm thinking of a friend of mine. She made a statement one time. We were both still working. And apropos of what, I don't know. Somehow someone was talking about uh, Christianity. I don't remember, but she made the statement, Stanley. She said, I don't have a single spiritual bone in my body. And I carried that statement and I pondered it. And at some point, I even said to her years later, I said, but look at how you treat animals. Look at how you've cared for dogs that have been abandoned, and even feeding wounded, even caring for wounded birds. I said, you don't use that language because it means something that you reject. But I look at the way you live, and a person could easily apply, you could say, you're living a spiritual life. Uh, because she's very and she gardens. She's intensely in contact with rain or lack thereof, snow, things that, a person in touch with the outdoor world knows by experience and knowledge from scientists. But her treatment of what we would call God's creatures, which she would never use that language, is done in a tender, loving shepherd kind of way. But she totally rejects any connection with any, you know, Christianity. If she, somebody, she'll even kind of spit that word out, so and so claims to be a Christian. Well, and there's plenty of examples of people that she can point to uh, who make that, they're and they don't they don't they don't live any kind of a such a life. But in her rejection, I don't have a spiritual bone in my body. It's just I've always found it interesting, and in watching her, I finally had the ability to say to her, "But you look at how you do the things I just
How did she
described."
respond?
She said, "I can see what you're saying." It didn't change her use of vocabulary because
Well,
she was going to live that way, had lived that way, as far as I can tell, all her life practically.
I think that there's several different ways of that sort of stance developing. One of them is reaction formation. It's a psychological uh, construct, a description of a condition that's caused by um, you're confronted by something and you uh, find it distasteful, perhaps, and so you develop a reaction to it. And someone has described themselves as spiritual or been identified as spiritual that was stinky instead, and she got a whiff of it, and it stuck to the word.
Well, and I think, yeah, and I think some people, a moral code, and people can disagree with this, a moral code can develop outside of a religious tradition. I think that's what she's done because even her neighbors, I remember one time, this is a good example. A neighbor that she really didn't care for that much was getting a roof put on. And but the neighbor was at work or wherever, and this woman was home watching it go on, and she watched them. This company put this roof on, and she said, "They're doing it wrong. They are doing it wrong." And she called the company and said, "They aren't putting any black paper." That she kind of knew how it went up there, and they came out and said, "Yeah, you're right. Stop." And this is, so there's a helping neighbors you didn't even particularly care for. So, I mean, a moral code can develop outside of a religious tradition. And I think that's, it doesn't mean that there's not value, but we all know now, I mean, there are religious traditions that are very coming along now. Well, I don't know, call it religious tradition, but there's religiosity that is a danger to all of us as separation of church. I mean, for people, I remember we were talking about this at somebody's house the other day. You remember you'd see in the paper, attend the church of your choice. It wasn't important what denomination it was, but that was a common
Right.
phrase, attend the church of your choice. But there was a recognition, it was part of a recognition that this was a private thing. It was your choice.
Right.
You could be in touch with, you could call it divinity, call it whatever you want, but it wasn't going to be forced on you. Uh, and so some of these things we see developing now uh, is truly violent and portends violence. Uh, who knows? It could develop out of some. It could develop some other way, I suppose. This refusal to, as you say, what you said. Some Zen person said, "Zen is the art of minding your own business." Well, this is totally the opposite of that. So it's confusing, I think, to those who aren't washed in the blood the way you are. Um, when they watch this, it just looks like they associate it, every Christian's a Christian nationalist. I don't, it's hard to know if you're kind of not in one of those traditions. You might just think, it's just Christianity or whatever run amok.
Well, I think that Jesus pointed to the separation between church and state.
Yeah, it's
He
cool,
said,
you know,
render unto
render
Caesar.
unto Caesar. That's exact. Yeah, but it's not about that.
Right.
Um,
I think that Christianity made a horrible turn uh, uh, when it became uh, the Holy Roman Empire.
tied to it got used, I think um, somebody saw it valuable to achieve ends that they wanted for themselves. And that happens with other things.
Yeah. Uh, to I think it became something that Jesus uh, has no part in.
No, it's the total. It's like it couldn't be more opposite of the teachings of Jesus. I mean, you couldn't make it more opposite of that. I'm
And
saying awkwardly, but
yeah, and there's people who choose. I think that it's the Christmas season, and we have to remember that it began with a little baby, totally helpless, totally vulnerable.
yeah, what does that
God
story
became
mean?
vulnerable,
Yeah,
and he didn't grow up into a bully. That was not ever uh,
part of the real tradition.
the
No,
real tradition.
no, not at
The
all.
the Crusades, no, not Jesus,
Right.
not Jesus.
Yeah, the violent will absorb, will adhere to anything they think is something they can use. And we see that happening. It's not new,
And
but sometimes it gets worse. It waxes and wanes in its severity. And
yeah,
we're in that era now.
I think that there's a real issue there for soldiers. Uh, how do we how do we manage our faith and our role as not just soldiers but officers?
Oh, yes.
I've been deputized. You know I'm very familiar with firearms. I've
Yeah.
had to do them as part of my military service, and I've had to do them as a protector of the peace. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Were you a constable? Is that how you
I've been a special deputy.
oh, okay.
Um,
Yeah,
and
that was part of your history I knew about.
yeah, um, I was carried in the Air Force
Yeah.
as part of the security forces, um, and how do you resolve that? I'm with the turn the other cheek. I'm exploring that.
Yeah.
I'm looking at uh, I'm looking at what it means to be Christian and what it means to be fully human. So
Yeah.
it keeps me out of the bars and off the streets.
I don't think you want to has too much trouble with that these days, but let me uh we're bouncing back and forth here, but I'm some of what I'm seeing, I keep looking to that tree behind you, thinking Christmas, which we'll move in, as I say, to it was just yesterday, but I'm thinking about things during a period of my life of early childhood, um, things that were allowed to be perceived because of, you know, uh, I didn't live now in places where this couldn't happen. So, and this will be the last, and I think we're getting into a period where you got
Yeah,
to
I need to get
be
in.
available to Barbara.
Yeah.
But this will be my last one, short, not long, called Beacon. An evening in November, I look out at the lights on the street of our newest address. I see them shine in such a way I remember lights in another town almost all my life ago at Christmas time. One light in particular at my father's two-chair barber shop on West Main. In the after hours darkness, a lighted plastic Santa Claus sat atop the Coke machine in an unearthly glow, illuminating nothing but itself, which was perfect. It was just the thing I wanted to see there almost all my life ago at Christmas time. It's a very innocent thing that could happen. Uh, so, but that's all that I read. So yeah, go take care of Barbara. And how's that song go again?
I love you, Barbara. I do. I love you, Barbara.
Barbara,
I do.
do,
I love you, Barbara. I do.
do,
Oh,
do,
Barbara, I love you.
do, 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 do. Very good.
Well, Tom, it's been wonderful.
Yeah.
I love our conversations. We might what we might want to do is start. I finish up with Pat Baker. We're doing our videos in general around 9.
Okay.
We might consider starting a little earlier. It's either start earlier or move to later in the afternoon. And we had talked about that, or just continue to kind of struggle with it. Yes.
Well, let's see how it goes. We're moving into the new year. Uh, Probably if it had to make a change, I'd say maybe a little earlier because I got to make sure I got to have some ideas, and I sometimes I
Well,
have.
a little earlier, uh, she's settling into a kind of a routine,
Yeah,
and sometimes she'll sleep later, like as far as noon or 1.
yeah.
So if
Well,
she,
and if we start at 10 and keep it to an hour, which I think is plenty long,
yeah,
but we'll figure things out as we
okay,
go
but
here.
yeah, I'm really I love doing this. I end up, you know, with about as much to say as you, and sometimes more. You're a
Well,
great host, Tom.
that that's fine.
Yeah, we might want to get Aaron Lip to come so you could get be host and get him to talk some about
Yeah.
what he
Well,
does.
he's got something that some of the what we talked about, his album, The Terminally Unique. We
Uh,
used that, and I think I read the Secrets. That was from, that's something he wrote. But yeah,
well,
he's somebody I'm getting acquainted with, so I'm really
okay.
enjoying those interactions. So,
Anytime you want to include somebody, it's easy
well,
enough.
you too. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All
Hi
right,
to
Tom.
Barbara. Hi to Barbara.
And
See you
hi to
next
Julia.
time.